The time has arrived to begin session. Mr. Cook notices absence of a quorum. Sergeants will bring in the absent members. Clerk will call the roll.
Adams, Amiano, Anderson, Arambula, Bass, Bell, Bill Berryhill, Tom Berryhill, Blakesley, Block, Blumenfield, Bradford, Brownlee, Buchanan, Caballero, Calderon, Carter, Chesbro, Conway, Cook, Cotto, Davis, De La Torre, De Leon, DeVore, Emerson, Ing, Evans, Fior, Fletcher, Fong, Fuentes, Fuller, Furutani, Gaines, Galgiani, Garrick, Gilmore, Hagman, Hall, Harkey, Hayashi, Hernandez, Hill, Huber, Huffman, Jeffries, Jones, Knight, Liu, Logue, Lowenthal, Ma, Mendoza, Miller, Monning, Nava, Nastande, Nilo, Nilsson, Norby, V. Manuel Perez, Portantino, Ruskin, Salas, Saldana, Silva, Skinner, Smythe, Solorio, Strickland, Swanson, Torlixon, Torres, Tarico, Tran, Valines, Yamada, Mr. Speaker.
Members, a quorum is present. We ask our guests and visitors in the rear of the chamber and the gallery to please stand for the prayer, and we will have our Assembly Chaplain, Pastor Williams, to lead us in the prayer today.
Good morning. Let us bow our heads for prayer. O God of glory and God of light, we come to you this morning asking for your divine presence to be with us in our deliberations today. You are the God of great resources and endless opportunities. And so we ask that you will come and give us wisdom to use these resources that you have given us to the best of our ability. Bless this chamber, bless each member, and I pray, O God, that today, when the day ends, we will look back and know that you have been present and we have done the best because of you. In thy name, amen.
Amen. Please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance, will be led by Dr. Emerson. Thank you. You may be seated. We'll have the reading of the previous day's journal.
Assembly Chamber, Sacramento, Wednesday, March 24, 2010. The Assembly met at 7 a.m. Honorable Chuck DeVore, Assembly Member 7th District, Presiding Chief Clerk E. Dawson Wilson, to desk, Assistant Clerk Timothy Moreland.
Mr. Calderon moves and Mr. Garrick seconds. Mr. Hagman seconds that the reading of the previous day's journal be dispensed with. Presentations of petitions, there are none. Introductions of reference of bills will be deferred. Reports of committees will be deemed read and amendments deemed adopted. Messages from the governor, there are none. Messages from the Senate, there are none. We recognize the absence of the Honorable Karen Bass and Cameron Smythe on legislative business, personal business. The Honorable Joan Buchanan, Ted Lieu, Ma Saldana, and Adams. A funeral, death, and family, the Honorable Brian Anastande. We'll move to motions and resolutions. Mr. Calderon.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I request unanimous consent for Assembly Member Cook and Salas to have guests and photographers on the floor today. Also, I request unanimous consent to allow Assembly Members Anderson, Block, Emerson, Fletcher, Fong, Hagman, Huffman, and Jay Perez, Monning, and Tarico to speak on an adjournment in memory today.
Without objection, the request is granted.
I have some referrals to committee. No, there are none. There are some. Request unanimous consent to re-refer AB 1847 Furutani from the Public Safety Committee to the Judiciary Committee and then back to the Public Safety Committee.
Without objection, the request is granted.
Also, Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to re-refer AB 2677 Fuentes from the Banking and Finance Committee to the Rules Committee.
Without objection, the request is granted.
I request unanimous consent to suspend the rules to withdraw AB 1596 by Ms. Hayashi from the Appropriations Committee and order the bill to second reading, since it is no longer a fiscal bill.
Without objection.
And I will, Mr. Speaker, be requesting to go back to motions and resolutions at sometime later in the session. There's one more motion I have to do to send an AB bill back to the Senate, and I'm going to get that information right now.
Without objection. We have some guests in the chambers today. I believe Ms. Conway has some guests she'd like to introduce from her desk. Ms. Conway. Members.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know if I can locate them, but I hope they're up there. Today, we have visiting the Capitol the Leadership Visalia is the program as we used to call it. I think it's called Central Valley Leadership now. but a group from the Chamber of Commerce from the Central Valley, the beautiful city of Visalia and surrounding areas, and I think some of you are familiar with that. And they are here to watch and learn about the fascinating process that we go through every day. So please, members, if you would join me in welcoming them this morning. Thank you.
Welcome to the Capitol. Welcome to the Capitol. We can recognize Ms. Salas and Mr. Cook. I believe they also have guests in the chambers. Ms. Salas, Mr. Cook. And please, he's at Mr. Predis' desk.
Thank you very much. Members, could I have your attention, please? Members.
Members, if and when another member is presenting a guest, we ask that you give that member your undivided attention, and we will not continue until your attention is given. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think everybody remembers the battles we had about the Welcome Home Vietnam veterans. Today we are commemorating that. We are going to commemorate that at 11 out there at the memorial right here on the Capitol grounds. But I'm joined today by some very, very special guests, and I have a couple of resolutions. And I hope they're in back me. And right off the bat, I want to, this is somewhat ironic because I'm going to recognize somebody from Chuck Calderon's district, somebody that I'd ask him to come up right now. And I'm going to do the first one here with Mary. And this is Jose Ramos. Come here, Jose. You got to get in the middle of it. This guy here is a true hero. A couple of Bronze Stars. He's been wounded in combat. And then, I tell you, he did not take his pack off because he was truly, truly dedicated to the Vietnam veterans. And he has been fighting this battle for so long from his command post, and I'm sure it's got sandbags and barbed wire down there in Whittier, California, to lead the fight so that we do not forget the Vietnam veterans. And this is a very, very special day, and it is my honor, and Mary, if you can say a few words afterward, to honor this very, very special hero that obviously hasn't given up the fight and has continued all these years. So, Jose, I want to honor you, and I got to honor your wife because she has been in the foxhole with you, and it is our honor and our tribute to you. So, thank you very much.
Welcome. Welcome to the Capitol.
Thank you and your wife.
Absolutely. She's my hero. She's the one that brought me home. There she is. This is my hero, everybody. This is the lady that brought me home. Thank you.
I also wanted to welcome you, Jose, and thank you for all the work that you did to make sure that the Vietnam veterans were rightfully, again, placed in their honor of respect. You know, during those turbulent times in the 70s, oftentimes what happened is that we confused the warrior with the war. And so it's with great honor that I stand before you, such a hero in our country. And thank you for fighting for us in those dark days, and that we're finally remembering the sacrifices that you made. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. We got one more presentation. And General Brodigan, I'd like you to help me with this. This is we got our group here, and I always, I'm just a colonel. I always have to default to the general to make sure that I get it right. So I wanted your help to say a few words with regards to the presentation. But this is to the Vietnam Veterans of America, the California State Council, that has led this fight. They've been behind it. They came all the way down to 29 Palms on a nice cool day where it was 105 degrees, I think. And the general was the MC at that time, and I wanted to have his help in presenting this to the council and to the distinguished guys we got here. Yeah, if you don't mind.
First of all, I want to certainly thank Assemblymember Cook and all of the members of this assembly for unanimously passing Assembly Bill 717 to honor all of us Vietnam veterans of America. I am a Vietnam veteran like Paul Cook, and with us today we have some of the members of the State Council and the President of Vietnam Veterans of America. I want to mention who they are and introduce them. And first of all, I want to introduce Robert Johnston, who is the President of the Vietnam Veterans of America. And then we have Jerry Yamamoto, who's one of the members of the Council, Dick Southern, a member of the Council, Ken Holeby, past Commander or President of Vietnam Veterans of America. And up in the gallery, we have a lot of other brother and sister Vietnam veterans who are here to witness this presentation today. But again, thank you all for honoring Jose and all the Vietnam Veterans of America.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Nilsen has guests that he would like to recognize. Mr. Nilsen, would you like to recognize your guests at this time?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to acknowledge here with us today the wife of a longtime friend of Marilyn and mine. This is Tammy Zack, wife of our friend Mitch Zack. Obviously, Tammy's a very good friend as well, and their kids Deuce and Molly. And with them are former California residents, but now residents of Columbus, Ohio, Tracy Musser, Jordan, Jarrett, and Jack Musser. Good friends, welcome to California, and Tammy, howdy.
Welcome to the Capitol. Welcome to the Capitol. Thank you, Mr. Nilsen. All right, we'll move on to the business on the daily file. We'll have the second reading. The clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 1809, 1701, 2035, 1811, 1999, 2009, 1758 with amendments, 1956 with amendments, 17...
amendments deemed adopted. Go right ahead. Okay.
1956 with amendments, 1762, and Senate Bill 602 with amendments.
All bills will be deemed read and amendments adopted. We'll move to file item 12, AB 142 by Ms. Hayashi. The clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 142 by Assemblymember Hayashi and others, an act relating to California State Lottery, making an appropriation therefore and declaring the urgency thereof to take effect immediately.
Ms. Hayashi, one moment. Ms. Hayashi, you may begin.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker and members, I respectfully ask for concurrence and Senate amendments for AB 142. This bill seeks to increase the funding for public education through the California State Lottery Act. As many of you know, California's budget crisis has had a devastating impact on education funding. And while the lottery has augmented education funding, there is more that we could do. California's lottery continues to be one of the lowest in per capita sales, lowest in per capita payouts to schools, and has one of the lowest payouts to prize recipients. AB 142 brings California's lottery payout figures in line with other large state lottery systems and will increase funding for schools. Other states, including Texas, North Carolina, and Florida, have increased both sales and revenue by expanding prize payouts and sales. AB 142 is supported by many organizations, including the California Independent Grocers Association, the Association of California State Supervisors, GTEC, the Superintendent of Public Instruction, Jack O'Connell, and the California State PTA. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Seeing and hearing, Mr. Anderson.
I rise in support of this bill. Members, this is a common sense bill that will add over $1.4 billion to education over the first 4 years. I urge an aye vote. Thank you.
Seeing and hearing no further debate or discussion, clerk open the roll. All those voted desire to vote. 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 Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 58, noes 1. On the urgency, ayes 58, noes 1. On the measure, Senate amendments are concurred in. We'll move to file item 26, ACR 142 by Mr. Solorio. Clerk will read.
Assembly concurrent resolution 142 by Assemblymember Solorio and others relative to Cesar Chavez Day.
Mr. Mendoza. Mr. Mendoza.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members.
Do we need a 5-minute recess?
Mr. Speaker, I recommend a 5-minute timeout. Mr. Speaker, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'm here to present ACR 142, which calls upon all of Californians to participate in appropriate observances to remember Cesar Chavez as a symbol of hope and justice for all people. Cesar learned about injustice early in his life. He grew up in a small adobe home in Arizona with his family, who eventually lost their home to greedy bankers. He attended more than 30 elementary and middle schools, and after achieving an 8th grade education, Cesar left school to work in the fields full-time to support his family. Although his formal education ended then, he possessed an insatiable curiosity and was self-taught in many fields, as well as well-read throughout his life. In 1946, Cesar joined the U.S. Navy with the belief that it would provide for him and his family opportunities beyond working in the fields. He served in the Western Pacific in the aftermath of World War II. When he returned to California, the only work he would find would be back as a farm worker. He was contemptuous at the fact that he still faced such limited opportunities even after proudly serving his country. This is when he felt the calling to be the force of change. He was a symbol of injustice, an educator of civil and human rights, a role model, and a beloved friend to many. In 1952, he met his mentor, Fred Ross, of the Community Service Organization in San Jose. It was there that Cesar Chavez organizing efforts began. He went on to found and lead the first successful farm workers union in the U.S., United Farm Workers. In September of 1965, Cesar led a successful 5-year strike boycott that rallied millions of supporters to the United Farm Workers. He forged a national support coalition of unions, church groups, students, minorities, and consumers. The legacy of Cesar Chavez has touched many people throughout the world, and in his honor to present this resolution today, recognizing his work here in our state. Cesar Chavez passed away on April 23rd, 1993, in San Luis, Arizona, just a few miles away from his birthplace. His impact on our nation showed at his funeral service, which was attended by more than 50,000 people in Delano, California, the same community in which he planted his seeds for social justice. His motto on life, Si Se Puede, embodies the uncommon and invaluable legacy he left for the world to benefit. As a sign of respect for this great leader, dozens of communities across the nation have remembered him and renamed their schools, parks, and streets, libraries, and other public facilities in his honor. I ask that you please join me today in honoring his life and legacy of this great man, Cesar Chavez.
Mr. Swanson.
Mr. Speaker, colleagues, I rise today in support of ACR 142 to recognize a great Californian and a great American. Cesar Chavez was a humble man with uncommon but extraordinary vision. Cesar was 10 years old when his family moved to California as migrant workers, following the season of crops, living in labor camps, attending segregated and inferior schools, suffering the indignities of discrimination and exploitation of Mexican American laborers in California. From those challenging beginnings, Cesar Chavez became one of California's most respected, dignified, principled leaders of the labor movement. He used his religious background, the strength of his character he built from toiling the fields of California, and his quick mind and intellect to almost single-handedly move the entire country to securing civil rights for farm workers. He protected and served farm workers through United Farm Workers of America, as my colleague has just mentioned, and spearheaded the passage of the 1975 California Labor Relations Act, which is the only law ever passed to protect the unionization of farm workers. For more than 3 decades, Cesar led the first successful farm workers union in America, achieving dignity, respect, fair wages, medical coverage, pension benefits, and humane living conditions, as well as countless other rights and protections for hundreds of thousands of farm workers. Most importantly, what colored this man's behavior was his kindness and humility. He was disinterested in honors or celebrity or attention that came with being a leader. In fact, one of the things that always struck many people, and it's been reported of Cesar Chavez, that he never earned more than $6,000 a year during his lifetime. He never owned a house, and he passed away. He didn't have a vast fortune to leave his family. His vision and purpose were beyond material things. His intellectual motivation for the laborers of California grew out of his literal toiling of the earth, yet his vision and mandates for change were compelled from callings way beyond this earth. He simply demanded decent working conditions and the dignified treatment of human beings. The same enlightened approach to labor must guide the legislature today, and should certainly guide all of the committees of our assembly. For these and many other reasons, I commend this great man, this great civil rights and labor leader. And let me say, colleagues, parenthetically, that all of us have our personal commitments and passions, and sometimes there's not giving great credit for that work and that commitment. But I feel so blessed to have lived long enough to have met Cesar Chavez, to have seen his work firsthand, to have witnessed his compassion and sincere commitment to working people in the state of California, to witness his fasts when he was fasting for justice, to walk with the farm workers, to understand the coalitions that were built around this very powerful movement, and to live during a period of time when my family and many families did not eat a grape because of what it meant.
And so there's 30 seconds, Mr. Swanson.
And so there are very few leaders that come along that deserve this kind of dignity and this kind of respect. And so I'm honored to stand here to join you in supporting this resolution. And we all should remember this great Californian. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you so much, Mr. Swanson. Mr. Furtani, then Mrs. Lowenthal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Members, we have these very special days to acknowledge individuals who have had monumental impacts on history, not only of the state of California, but for the whole country. But it's an interesting thing about acknowledging these individuals is that we know the reality is that they did not do these things on their own. They marched arm in arm with many other people. Some names we know, most remain nameless, but just as heroic relative to their struggles and relative to their commitment to that place and time. Cesar Chavez is one of those great labor and civil rights leaders that captivated the imagination of not only Latinos and Mexicanos, but everybody in the United States. And who would have thought that through these great halls, even in this Capitol and other state buildings and Capitol buildings throughout this country, would the term "Si se puede" resonate and ring loud and clear as a clarion call for rights and justice for all people. One thing, along with Mr. Swanson, that I am also proud of is not having marched with Cesar, but have marched with others that knew Cesar well, and in fact helped start the United Farm Workers Movement. Several of those individuals were named Larry Itliong, Philip Vera Cruz, Pete Valesco, Filipino-American farm workers who, along with Cesar, Dolores Huerta, and many others, started the United Farm Workers Organization. In 1965, the great boycott and strike was started by Filipino farm workers in the Agricultural Workers Organization Committee. They were Filipino Americans, and when they joined with Cesar and Dolores and the many Mexicano farm workers, Mexicano American farm workers, other Arab farm workers, and others that were in the fields at those times, started this great movement that not only impacted those in the fields, but impacted those in the cities as well. So as we acknowledge this great individual, as we talk about the education that he himself was a part of and helped bring to the bear relative to our history, we need to acknowledge all those others that marched arm in arm with him, hand in hand with him, and struggled with him along the ways. So it's a pleasure to acknowledge this very special individual and those also that were a part of his movement. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Lowenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise today to celebrate the life and legacy of one of California's greatest natural leaders, Cesar Chavez. A perfect portrait of service, a life of self-sacrifice, a prime example of what leadership truly means. Cesar Chavez showed us the possibilities of espousing universal ideals, of living in harmony with those ideals, of living in a way that inspires others to find their ideals and live up to them. The legacy of Cesar Chavez is greater than labor laws and contracts. I feel very strongly, members, that we, every one of us, every Californian, are the real legacy of Cesar Chavez, as Mr. Swanson indicated. For many of us, we are enjoying opportunities and possibilities of which our parents might have only dreamt. For others of us, our parents were not...
Excuse me. Members, Members and those in the rear of the chambers. Please continue with
Thank you,
respect,
Mr.
Ms.
Speaker.
Lowenthal. Thank you.
For others of us, our parents were not laborers, and yet we too benefit from his efforts. We are enriched by the successes of others. We share in a broader, more expansive world, a world of possibility and inclusion. What's more, all of us are taking part in a journey that leads to an ever better California. I know we've all heard people say California is getting worse, that because of our financial troubles, we're heading over the cliff. They see doom and gloom and a dead end. And I think today, if you imagine what Cesar Chavez had and what he didn't have, and you ask yourself, what if he had stopped because there wasn't enough money or he thought things couldn't get better? Well, it's ridiculous. If Cesar Chavez had been put off by those kinds of hardships, we wouldn't be celebrating him here today. So that's how we can all live up to his challenge. That's how we can all live up to his legacy, by moving forward, always forward, walking past the people who say we can't, because if we've learned anything at all, it's that. Yes, we can. Sí se puede.
Thank you, Ms. Lowenthal. Mr. Alhambra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had not intended to speak, but I feel moved by the comments of the previous speakers to share a little bit of my experience with Cesar. You see, I grew up in Delano in the 1960s when the United Farm Workers Union was just starting. And I saw what life was like before, and I saw what life could be like after the union began to take hold. Before, people were abused and felt they had no recourse. They had no ability to improve their lives. Afterwards, people began to open their eyes and to see that we are all human beings and that we all deserve to be treated with dignity and with respect, regardless of where we were born, regardless of our background or language. He was a very humble man, but he brought out the best in all of us, and I too would like to join my colleagues in recognition of Cesar because he truly helped to open our eyes to the human dignity and worth of each individual. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alhambra. Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly. It is with honor that I rise in support of ACR 142 in commemorating the life and the work of Cesar Chavez. I remember his leadership, and I also remember his collaboration with other great leaders, including Dr. Martin Luther King. And I think what they both exemplify is the opportunity that you have in this country to overcome disadvantage, to overcome the hurdles that might be put in your way. Cesar Chavez in particular worked very hard to get respect for workers, many of whom were farm workers, those who needed to be respected in our agricultural community for the work that they do. We, I think, should pay tribute to him because after having gotten the respect, he has left a generation of leaders to follow him, many of whom have gone on to other areas of endeavor. And I remember Miguel Contreras, who was the leader of the Los Angeles Union Federation in our county, and his great leadership was as a result of him emulating the great work and principles and the core values that Cesar Chavez laid out for us. In particular, I was inspired by the cards on our desk and the quote that Cesar Chavez is indicated on this poster, and it simply says this that I think is very valuable for all of us. Once social change begins, it cannot be reversed. You cannot uneducate the person who has learned to read. You cannot humiliate the person who feels pride. You cannot oppress the people who are not afraid anymore. And I think that exemplifies the core values that Cesar Chavez has, and I think it in many ways gives us the reason to stand in honor, because he is an example of what the American experience is about and about the American dream that can happen for all of us. So on behalf of all of the Mexican-American citizens in my district and those throughout the state of California, it is with the greatest of pride that I urge your vote on ACR 143. Of two.
Mr. Solario.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, it's an honor for me to join with Assemblymember Mendoza in presenting this resolution. I, too, was raised near Delano in Huasco, the rose capital of the world, and I worked on the fields about 7 summers, so I learned what hard work is about. And that's part of what brought me here today. I know a lot's been said about the legacy of Cesar Chavez. I wanted to share with you a few funner facts about Cesar Chavez. He was vegetarian. A lot of people don't know about him. He had 2 dogs. One dog was named Boycott, and the other dog was named Huelga. Huelga means strike. He, as you know, was inspired by Gandhi and Martin Luther King, and so he was a big believer in nonviolent protests. And then many of you have seen the UFW flag. The UFW flag has the Aztec eagle, which is a symbol for the people of Mexico. There's a white circle that signifies hope and aspiration. And there's a red background. It's a red flag that stands for hard work and sacrifice. And then the motto of the UFW that Cesar Chavez led, the motto was, Viva la causa, long live our cause. Today we're honoring Cesar Chavez. We're honoring the UFW movement. And I thank you all for listening to the many presentations today. Of course, I rise in support of this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Solario. Mr. Mendoza, before you close, we'll focus our attention to the Honorable V. Manny Perez. He has remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I do rise as well in support of ACR 142, which recognizes March 31st, 2010 as the anniversary of the birth of Cesar Chavez. And I was also inspired by many of the speeches here today. And for me, this is very personal. I'm proud to say to all of you that I am the son of immigrant farm workers, and I myself as well worked in the fields for a period of years as a kid growing up in the city of Coachella. I think I mentioned to all of you some time ago that my mother worked in the fields for 28 years before she decided to retire from the fields. And I remember the stories and seeing how it was when I would go with my mother at 4 in the morning to go work in the fields. I remember the days in which there were no restrooms. There was no such thing as a restroom. And I remember the days in which there was no such thing as clean drinking water. We had to actually bring that drinking water from our home. And quite frankly, at the end of the day, if we didn't have that, obviously they didn't have fair wages. And so my parents had to struggle like many parents throughout the state of California and throughout our nation that had to work in the fields. And that's why it is important that we recognize this leader, Cesar Estrada Chavez, not only as a Mexican leader or as a Latino leader, but as an American leader. Because quite frankly, at the end of the day, he stood up for the right reasons. He stood up with a moral authority in which is based within the principle of values that are, for all of us, very important. The value of hard work, the value of education, the value of opportunity, the value of fairness, the value of equity, the value of justice. And that's what it's all about. And that's why it's very important that we recognize this man. And not only him, but also those that fought alongside with him for many, many, many years. Like the cuadrillas, like the farm workers themselves, and still struggling to this day. And we need to recognize that this movement still continues. It has not ended. And even though, for example, the strikes and the boycotts and those challenges that they had back then, there was some victories, it seems to me nowadays that we've gone backwards, that many farm workers today are still struggling. They are still sacrificing. They are still suffering. And I mentioned to you this before, they are still suffering in silence. It is our responsibility. It is our obligation to do what we can here in the state legislature to make sure that all these folks are empowered, no matter who they are. And one thing that has not been said about Cesar Chavez is that he believed in popular education. He believed in not only using strikes and those type of tactics and boycotts, but he also believed in the importance of educating folks. He also believed in the importance of literacy. And what does that mean? He felt it was important that everyone should have a right to education, and he felt it was important that every child, especially the children of farm workers, to learn, read, write, and speak fluently the English language. Not only the Spanish language, he appreciated that we would also keep our culture, but he also made sure and spoke to the farm workers that we all need to learn the English language, and it's important that we become literate. And he felt that if we're able to read the word, then we're able to read the world. If we're able to read the word, we're able to read the world. In other words, if farm workers understood their lot in society, and if the children of farm workers understood their lot in society, social change can come about, and social justice and equity can come about. And that's our responsibility here, to create those opportunities. And one last thing I'd like to just say as well. The first boycott was in my hometown, the city of Coachella, and I'm very proud to say that. Folks, remember that the boycotts began in Delano. That's true. We had many boycotts in Delano, but the very first boycott was with the United Farm Workers and AWOC, with the Filipino movement in the city of Coachella, and I'm very proud to say that. And once again, folks, I encourage all of you to recognize this great man, and I ask for your eye support. Muchísimas gracias a la Unión de Campesinos, Dolores Huerta, Cesar Chavez, and all his family, and everyone that's worked hard for these folks. Gracias.
Yeah. Mr. Mendoza, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, you can see how Cesar Chavez has pretty much touched every one of our lives in different aspects. And members, as we close, I would like to ask each and every one of you to add on as a co-author. Mr. Speaker, if we could have the first roll call for co-authorships, please.
Yes, that'll be fine.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to open up the roll for co-authors. We're going to open up the roll for co-authors. Clerk will open the roll. Members, this is for co-authors. Members, this is for co-authors. Members, this is for co-authors. Clerk will close the roll. 42 co-authors are recorded. We'll now have a voice vote on the resolution. All those in favor signify by the normal sound of aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. Resolution is adopted. Very well. Members will now move to file item 29, AB 1691. Pardon me. We'll move to file item 29, ACR 72 by Mr. Portantino. Clerk will read.
Assembly concurrent resolution 74 by Assemblymember Portantino and others relative to umbilical cord blood banking.
Mr. Portantino.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise today to ask you to support ACR 74, which seeks to further the cause of umbilical cord blood banking in the state of California. As you know, this has been a passion of mine since my first day in office. I was pleased to introduce my first bill on swearing-in day back in 2006. The bill enjoyed broad bipartisan support. I believe it got off the floor 79-0. This is a strong bipartisan effort to bring cures to Californians who are waiting desperately for bone marrow transplants. Umbilical cord blood is 100 times easier to match than bone marrow. We have 550,000 births a year in the state of California with the most diverse blood supply in the world, and we throw 99% of those rich stem cells in the trash. Members, that makes no sense to me. We have a strong private banking system in California where folks can go and pay to privately bank their own family's cord blood. This resolution seeks to both recognize the private efforts as well as the strong desire to have a public cord blood thriving system in the state of California, so each and every Californian who is desirous of a transplant and in need of a transplant to cure leukemia and 69 other blood-related diseases has access to those stem cells. And again, I want to thank members from both sides of the aisle who have stood with me on this issue and have continued to push it strongly. This resolution is one more
piece of that puzzle, and I strongly urge an aye vote, and I'm pleased to have Assemblymember Hill as a principal co-author, and I see Mr. Anderson rising to speak as well, and I appreciate all of his efforts in pushing this issue as well, and I urge an aye vote.
Mr. Anderson.
Members, I rise in support of this bill. It's a common sense bill. It offers the opportunity to solve a lot of the health care issues that we have. All our new technologies are coming from these stem cells, and it's a shame to let them go to waste. This is an easy way to move medicine forward. I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Jones.
Members, I want to commend the author for his tremendous leadership on this issue. He has been dogged in raising attention to this issue. It's a critical public health issue, and what he's proposing here will help save lives. I ask for your aye vote.
Very well. Thank you. Mr. Portino, would you like to close?
Thank you, members, for your encouragement and support. This does make sense. I appreciate your help, and I urge an aye vote.
Very well. Thank you. We will have a voice vote on the resolution. All those in favor signify by the normal sign of aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. Resolution adopted. Thank you. Members, if we can focus our attention to Dr. Emerson's desk. Ms. Conway has guests that she would like to present. Ms. Conway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Dr. Emerson, for the use of your microphone. Earlier today, I introduced a leadership group that's here visiting today from Leadership Visalia. They are actually now present in the chambers. So I'm also a proud graduate of this program. I forgot to tell you that. And they're with us up here, and if you would please join me in welcoming them to Sacramento today. Leadership Visalia.
Welcome. Welcome. Mr. Hagman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I, too, members, I do have some very special guests visiting here today, and that are the fourth graders from the Loving Savior Lutheran Elementary School out of Chino Hills, right up here in my hometown, my neighbors with their teacher, Ellen Rowley, and their parents. So we want to welcome you here to the Capitol today. Thank you for coming.
Very well. Welcome. Welcome to the Capitol. Ms. Conway, do you have
34?
I'm
yes,
sorry?
Mr. Speaker. It's file item 34. Are you calling on me to present?
Give me 1 second on the file. Mrs. Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to introduce everyone to some of my constituents from El Dorado Hills, Mrs. Locker's fourth grade class from Silva Valley Elementary, where my children go. Hello, up here, if you could say hello. And just one special note, one of our sergeants, Pete Harger, has a daughter in the class. Sophie's up there too. Say hi, Sophie. Your father keeps us safe. Welcome.
Very well, thank you. Yes, Mr. Calderon, for what purpose?
Mr. Speaker, to request unanimous consent to return file item 11, AB 585, by Mr. Duval, return it to the Senate for further action.
Without objection. Yeah. Okay, we'll move to file item 34, SB 183 by Lowenthal. Ms. Conway will be presenting. These are on amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. The amendments
Clerk will read.
Senate Bill 183 with amendments by Assemblymember Conway.
Members, these amendments are technical in nature, and they're necessary to update the year and implementation of the date of the bill. I respectfully ask for your aye vote and that these amendments go out to print and placed back on file.
Okay, very well. We'll have a voice vote on the amendments. All those in favor signify by the normal sound of aye. Any opposed? Amendments are adopted. Out to print and back on file. Okay, members, we're now at the second day consent calendar. Clerk will read.
Assembly Joint Resolution 30 by Assemblymember Salas relative to geothermal power projects and tax incentives.
Does any member wish to remove an item from the consent calendar? Hearing and seeing none, clerk will open the roll. All those voters desire to vote. 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 Clerk will close the roll. Tally the votes. Ayes 66, no 0. Consent calendar is adopted. Speaker Pettis, we'll move to Speaker Pettis. You have an adjourning memory.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I rise to adjourn in memory of my dear friend and trailblazer for social justice, Midge Costanza. Midge passed away in the Hillcrest neighborhood of San Diego on March 23rd after a long battle with cancer at the age of 77. Midge was well known and highly respected for her tireless efforts to advocate on behalf of the LGBT community, women, youth, seniors, people of color, and the disabilities community. Born in 1932, Midge was raised in a modest but proud Sicilian home. After high school, she worked her way up from clerical work to become an active community leader. She had a long involvement in politics, most notably when she served as the county executive director for the Robert F. Kennedy successful campaign for Senate in 1964. She served as a member of the Democratic National Committee from 1972 to 1977. And in 1973, she was elected in a landslide to serve on the Rochester City Council. She should have become the mayor. But instead, the city council named the first runner-up as mayor because they couldn't see fit to have a woman serve in that capacity. In 1977, under President Carter, Midge made history again as the first woman to serve in the White House as assistant to the president for public liaison. In that position, she facilitated the first ever White House meeting with LGBT advocates. This meeting occurred against the backdrop of Anita Bryant's notorious 1977 Save Our Children campaign. Following her tenure in the White House, she continued a career in public service by serving on many boards and with several organizations and serving a previous governor of this state. And currently, she just left work for the district attorney of San Diego County. Her accomplishments, her good nature, and her genuine compassion are reasons that so many people are mourning her loss. I knew Midge for many years. I considered her a friend and a mentor. When I was contemplating running for the Assembly, Midge was one of the first people I called. She got on a train from San Diego, came to Los Angeles, sat with me, counseled me, gave me advice, and in a way that only Midge could, she looked at me and joked with me. And one of her greatest strengths was this amazing smile, this twinkle in her eye, this ability to disarm people even when they disagreed with her through her incredible use of humor. The loss of a woman with such compassion and devotion for social justice and such a fantastic sense of humor are going to be missed by so many Californians. She really was a unique and special individual. So I ask that you join me in adjourning in memory of my friend and dedicated champion for civil rights, Midge Costanza.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Midge Costanza was a larger-than-life personality, and that might shock you if you saw her, because she was only about this tall. She was someone who cared. She had, the Speaker mentioned the twinkle in her eye. She had an affectionate personality that just drew you into her, and she had an amazing ability to come up and smile and ask you how your day was going and genuinely care. Ask you how your family was, and you know that it meant so much to her. She just had an amazing ability to draw people in, to her warmth, to her compassion, to her caring nature. She connected with people. I only knew her in the recent years in San Diego, in her time working for the district attorney. Everybody loved Midge, regardless of party, regardless of ethnicity. She was someone who just had this amazing ability to make people feel comfortable and feel warm. There was one GOP member of the Assembly that she took great pride in seeing if she could make him blush by saying sometimes funny and not coming from Midge, but interesting things about in speeches, and that was me. And she would point things out in speeches, and everybody would chuckle and laugh, and it was so endearing. And it was a loss as she struggled with illness over the last few weeks. It's been really hard on a lot of folks. And her passing will leave a tremendous void. Midge once described herself as coming from New York as a loudmouth, pushy broad. And there's press accounts of her time in the White House where she never pulled punches, and when she disagreed with the president, she would say she disagreed with the president. And I think that while Midge may have described herself that way, everyone who knew her will describe her as a passionate, fiery, big-hearted, all in for everything she did type personality, and she's someone who will leave a tremendous void, but had a great influence on a number of us here today who are now in public office. She'll be deeply missed, and we thank you for taking the time to adjourn in her memory today.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Mr. Block.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join my colleagues today in adjourning in memory of Midge Costanza. I knew Midge very well. In 1990, she came to San Diego, and I was newly elected to my first public office. And Midge took me aside when she heard me speak one time and said, "Marty, you're doing it all wrong." And she then worked tirelessly to try to coach me in terms of how to get my message across, sometimes successfully, sometimes not successfully. Midge is someone who I worked with again at San Diego State. Later in her tenure in San Diego, she founded in the Political Science Department and Women's Studies Department something called the Midge Costanza Institute for the Study of Politics and Public Policy. She encouraged students, particularly female students, to become active in the political process and just to recognize the importance of the kind of things that we often do here. She led in San Diego the Gray Davis campaign for governor. She served as his liaison on women's groups and women's issues. In 2005, she joined the San Diego County District Attorney's Office, and though Midge was proudly partisan, she spent her last years working with Bonnie Dumanis, our Republican District Attorney, in a model of bipartisanship. The two of them did great things for the city and county of San Diego. Midge was spunky, she was spirited, and she was smart, and she will be very much missed.
Thank you, Mr. Block. Ms. Salas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You've heard a lot about Midge. She had a huge heart, a great intellect, great wit, and for many of us that knew her, we consider it a personal loss because of the connections that she made to us on a very, very deep level. First and foremost, Midge was a feminist, and she was a pioneer in the feminist movement. And when I first met Midge, way back in 1992, that was even before I even became interested or ever thought that I was going to run for any political office. But as was mentioned, she was a great communicator, and she coached so many of us. She taught so many of the women that have served here in the Assembly. She knew each of us personally and really added to our abilities and was a cheerleader for us and a coach and an example. So many of us that are not here in this room today benefited from her very early work and her pioneerism to make sure that women were elected to all levels of government. So some of the members that were her very close friends that are not here but served here in this assembly: Lucy Calea, Susan Davis, Denise DeChaney, Christine Kehoe, Lori Saldana, myself. We all benefited from the love and the experience of Midge Costanza. We are going to miss her very much. There are few people in this world that are like Midge and have that type of personality and generosity, and I personally am going to miss her very, very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Salas. Dr. Emerson.
It is with great sadness that I ask the Assembly to adjourn in the memory today for Barry Nastandi. Barry grew up in Orange County, California, and was bitten by the political bug as a young child when his father, Bruce Nastandi, who was a member of the California State Assembly and later of the Orange County Board of Supervisors. Barry followed his true passion, working with his brother Brian, our colleague, on political campaigns in Riverside County as a principal of the Nastandi and Associates government relations firm. In 2001, he became a consultant to John Benoit in his successful bid for the State Assembly. In his capacity as Chief of Staff, Barry distinguished himself by providing outstanding service to the citizens of the 64th Assembly District and the 37th Senate District. While working for John Benoit, Barry earned immense respect from his colleagues for his dedicated service to the people of California and his ability to work with individuals across the aisle. He was an invaluable resource to this institution, and his work will always be greatly appreciated. Services for Barry have been planned by his family for tomorrow, Friday, March 26th at 10 a.m. at Southwest Community Church in Indian Wells. Barry will be missed by his family, friends, and the community he so gladly served.
Thank you. Ms. Galgiani has a guest she'd like to recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm here to welcome Zephanie Smith, who's a student from my district, and she's here participating in a class trip, California Politics, with Professor Ken Miller from Claremont McKenna College. Please welcome Zephanie Smith.
Welcome. She's in the rear of the chambers. Welcome to the Capitol. Welcome to the Capitol. Mr. Hackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I rise to adjourn memory today for Eston Grubb, who was born October 7, 1923, and passed away on March 24, 2010. During World War II, Eston and his twin brother convinced their mother to allow them to enlist in the Navy before they graduated high school, after which he earned his bachelor's degree in engineering from UCLA and the GI Bill. Eston worked for North American Rockwell. Rockwell International is very proud of his work in the Space Shuttle program. Eston Grubb is a lifetime supporter of the Scouting program, not only in his native Whittier, California, as Scoutmaster for Troop 985, but throughout the country, where he serves as advisor to the National Boy Scout Council. Throughout his scouting career, he made it possible for hundreds, if not thousands, of youth to attend National Scout Jamboree and the National Order of the Arrow conferences. His dedication to youth involved in the scouting program has enriched many lives and many youth in California and given them lifelong memories and experiences that may not have been possible without his generosity and commitment. Among his many honors include the Distinguished Service Award by the Order of the Arrow, Boy Scouts of America, Lifetime Scouter Award, Rio Hondo District, Boy Scouts of America, Founders Award, Swins Lodge, Order of the Arrow, Boy Scouts of America. He's also a Vigil Honor Member and recipient of the Silver Beaver, Silver Antelope, and the National OA Distinguished Service Award. Eston was a Mason and active member of his church. He was honored by his church, First United Methodist Church, with a Lifetime Scout Award on 2/14/2010. He's survived by his wife, Gloria, of age 63, and their sons, Travis and Tim, and family of Scouters across the country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members.
Thank you. Mr. Monning and Mr. Huffman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise to ask that we adjourn today's session in memory of Stuart L. Udall, who passed away at the age of 90 at his home in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Mr. Udall served our country with distinction as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives and as Secretary of the Interior under Presidents Kennedy and Johnson. He was the last surviving member of President Kennedy's first cabinet. As Secretary of the Interior, he championed and led bipartisan support for acquisition of vast tracts of land as national holdings and landmark legislation on air, water, and land conservation. President Obama commented that Mr. Udall, quote, left an indelible mark on this nation and inspired countless Americans who will continue to fight for clean air, clean water, and to maintain our natural treasures. Mr. Udall presided over the acquisition of Redwood National Park in California, along with multiple recreation areas, historical sites, wildlife refuges, and national seashore sites. Mr. Udall was a liberal from a conservative state. His legacy is distinguished by his strong commitment to bipartisanship on environmental issues. He described the Washington, D.C. of the 1960s as a big tent on the environment. He lauded the shared commitment of Republicans and Democrats to the preservation and stewardship of our nation's environment. He took pride in his work with both the Nixon and Ford administrations on environmental protection. Stuart Udall's brother Morris, who followed Stuart in congressional service, often worked as Stuart's congressional partner when Stuart served as Secretary of the Interior. Prior to his death, Stuart Udall was the patriarch of a political family that included his brother Mo, his son, U.S. Senator Tom Udall from New Mexico, and his nephew, Senator Mark Udall from Colorado. In addition to his son Tom, Mr. Udall is survived by 3 other sons, 2 daughters, and 8 grandchildren. In a recent letter to his grandchildren, Mr. Udall urged them to focus on, quote, trying to transform our society to a clean energy and clean job society. I thank you, Mr. Chair and members, for adjourning in the memory of Stuart Udall. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tirico.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to adjourn in the memory of retired Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Clifford Brennan, father of Terry Brennan, who passed away Monday morning after a long and courageous battle with cancer. A Californian native, he was born in Long Beach in 1933. He was a decorated combat veteran of both the Korean and Vietnam Wars and received his Bachelor of Arts degree from Aquinas College in Michigan in 1965. He was preceded in death by his wife of 51 years, Donna Mae, along with Terrence, his 4th son. He was also the proud father of 3 other sons, Thomas, Patrick, and Christopher. He's survived by 6 grandchildren, Scott, Kevin, Christopher, Alexandra, Alex, and Kristen. I ask the Assembly adjourn in memory of this decorated veteran.
Thank you, Mr. Tirico. Members, please be advised the session schedule is as follows. Of course, we have spring recess upon adjournment of today's session. Friday, March 26th, recess. We'll celebrate March 29th, the holiday of the Honorable Cesar Chavez. We'll return Monday, April 5th, floor session at 12 noon. I believe that's pretty much it. Pretty much it. Seeing and having no other business before the House, Mr. Calderon moves, Mr. Hackman seconds that the House stands adjourned until April 5th, 12 noon. All those in favor signify by the normal sound of aye. Any opposed? Quorum call is